Okay, so I'm doing this as a separate video just because we're shifting gears a little bit. One of the biggest questions is often nonprofit or LLC. Now, I'm going to talk about more about this in the implementation, but right here I want to tell you what you need to know now if you don't have a facility, especially because there is kind of an important piece here with the facility if you are looking at churches, okay? So you need to know this part before you go look for a facility, but also I just want you to wrap your head around the difference between these two things as you formulate your plan and just see which one resounds with you best. And if you're not really sure, then that's okay too. So right now, you're going to need to decide at some point, but it's okay if you don't really know right away. You want to think about it or maybe gather some more information. This is just kind of your primer, okay? So the two main legal structure, business structure setups are usually nonprofit, a 501c3, or an LLC, a limited liability company. Okay. I'm going to talk about the LLC first because it's the simplest. An LLC, limited liability company, it's just a private business. Okay. It's pretty simple to set up. I set up Changing Childhoods as an LLC. It's a couple pages that you send into your state with a fee. There's usually a fee, $100 or something. You get an EIN from the IRS, and your profits are taxed through your personal income, unless you do this S Corp thing, but don't worry about that right now. Now, you as a founder, if you choose this, you are the business owner. You own the business. You do all the governance. You do all the compliance. You also make the money in the sense that if your revenue exceeds your expenses, which we think of as, that's profit, right? You bring in $100,000 and you pay everybody once you've paid all of your expenses, your rent, your business expenses, your training, your curriculum, your teachers, all of that stuff. If you have, $25,000 left, you get to keep that, but it's going to be taxed, okay? So it's going to be taxed through your personal income, just like your income is taxed, okay? So that's important to realize as far as that part of it. But in, capitalism, the person who is earning the money is also running the business, okay? That's a for-profit business. So if you do really well and you can get your costs down and, you're bringing in the money and you're working your tail off and whatever, you get the reward of that by having the profit from the business, okay? And you're making the decisions. You're making all the decisions. Nobody else is making the decisions. Okay. Now, something that you need to understand with this, because a lot of hybrid schools, I guess micro schools also, although there's more, if you're micro school in the sense that you're like 10 or 12 kids or fewer, because you don't need as much space, sometimes there's more choices as far as like doing it in your house or, renting a room from an event place or community center or a farm or something like that. You won't probably have a problem if you're an LLC and you do that. However, in most states, and this is not legal advice or accounting advice, but I know that Carol Top from Homeschool CPA has written about this on her site. And there are often problems with a church's tax exempt status if they rent to a LLC. Okay. So if you know you're going to rent from a church, or that it just makes a lot of sense for a part-time school program to rent from a church because they often have classrooms sitting empty all week long, okay, you may run into trouble. The churches either won't want to rent to you at all, or if they do, there's a bunch of hoops to jump through in order to do that. It's not impossible, but you do want to talk to a lawyer if you are going to be an LLC and rent from a church to make sure that it's all okay and you don't get the church into tax trouble. Because churches are tax deductible and they don't get taxed on their property. But if they rent to a for-profit business, they can run into trouble. So that is often something people really need to know when they're planning and they're doing their facility search and they're choosing their business setup. Okay, now, a nonprofit is a lot more complex to run. But don't be scared because I can help you with it and teach you what I learned over 8 years of working with a nonprofit, because that is what we ended up doing. That's how we started, but I didn't really know a lot about a nonprofit at the time. So here's the reasons to become a nonprofit. A nonprofit can use volunteers for like labor, for like workers. Like you can have volunteers as aides or as secretarial help. They can actually be doing the work of the organization as a volunteer. You can't do that with an LLC. You have to pay people. Okay, but you also can, hire people in a nonprofit, including yourself. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Although you can't hire yourself. The board has to hire you. That's a whole other thing. They can also fundraise and receive grants. Okay, and that can be a huge benefit because you are eligible for tens of thousands of dollars of grants sometimes. It took us a few years to get grants, but by the time we had like the, mind power and staff power to apply for grants, we did get several. And that's very, very useful for bringing in money. Profits in the sense that, like, let's say you bring in $100,000 and you paid everybody and you still have $10,000 left at the end of the year. It doesn't get taxed. It just stays, it doesn't get taxed on personal or corporate. It just stays with the organization. Now, the key thing here with the nonprofit versus for-profit wording really is kind of a capitalist word, okay? Because like I said in the LLC, the person who's running the business gets to keep the profit in a for-profit business. In a nonprofit, why it's called that is not because revenues can't exceed expenses. That's not why. It's because the person who starts the business cannot earn a personal profit, and they also cannot govern and make money at the same time. Okay, and this is really key to understand. You have to have a board, and the board cannot get paid. So if you want to be governing, you have to sit on the board, and you have to be one of multiple people on the board with one vote, and you can't get paid. If you want to run the business on the ground every day, you're probably going to be a staff member, but you're going to be subject to board approval. They have to decide your pay. Well, there's a couple different ways that can happen, but often the founder ends up being the executive director, or there's like an executive team. You can sit in board meetings. You can practically run them, although the president should be running them. That's part of that training. But you can't vote. So but you're doing the work and you can be on staff. So a lot of times what this ends up looking like is a founder gets some people together to be on their board. People they know are supportive, like people they know, or maybe community leaders or whatever. And the board ends up doing the board's jobs, just appoints them as the executive director, decides on their salary. They should be deciding on their accountability also. And then they just let them go run the program, okay? And they do all the other hiring and maybe oversee all of the budget and all of that stuff, subject to board oversight and accountability. So that's what that ends up looking like. But the key thing to understand there is that as a founder, you cannot personally benefit and govern in a nonprofit. It's supposed to be missional. You need a board, you need bylaws, you need to have regular board meetings, but you do get the benefits of volunteers, fundraisers, grants, not having to pay taxes. So it's not a bad model at all, but it is a little more complex. And actually getting your IRS non-501c3 status, you have up to 2 years. So what that process looks like is you also just send in a piece of paper, just like with the LLC to the state, but you're not starting an LLC, you're starting a nonprofit. But then you have up to 27 months to actually file with the IRS as a 501c3, which is not super simple and it's a little expensive. But you have 2 years. So you can raise some money and then you can pay an accountant to fill out the form for you. And you have to pay the accountant and you have to pay the fee to the IRS, which is, I think it's $800. And then the accountant probably is going to be $800. But you only have to do that once. And then you have to file taxes every year. Which you also have to pay the account for. But you're going to have to do that with an LLC too. But with an LLC, a lot of people, it's just an extra form on their personal taxes, where with this, it's this whole 990 form. Okay, so this is important for you to understand as you go look at a facility because of that church thing. But that's your primer on that, okay?